Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2023 Daily Bruin Alumni Reunion. My name is Lawrence Ma, President of Daily Bruin Alumni Network. Today we're pleased to present this very important conversation about news literacy and our democracy. I was lucky. My education on the topic began with a teacher named Mr. Lee Swinson at Aragon High School in San Mateo, California, way back in 1986. And as a ninth grader, and with my social studies classmates, he made us read a newspaper every day and apply the lessons of Voltaire, Lord Acton, to the politicians in the pages of the San Francisco Chronicle. This hour, you will hear from two distinguished journalists, a high school teacher, a student, and about the impact that the News Literacy Project is making in classrooms today. Now, we're delighted and honored to have this great panel with us today, and in the interest of giving them as much time as possible, I'm just going to ask for your forgiveness that my introductions do not do the full justice to your stellar careers. Matea Gold, UCLA class of 1996, is an award-winning journalist and a managing editor of the Washington Post. It all began right here at UCLA for Matea, where she served as editor-in-chief of the Daily Bruin in 1994-95, before heading over to the LA Times. In her 17-year run with the Times, she's covered two presidential campaigns, 2000 and 2004, two California governor's races, two mayoral races, and the LA City Hall. Matea joined the Washington Post in 2013 as a national reporter covering money and politics, and then moved to the editor's desk in 2017. As the Post national editor, she oversaw an expansion of ambitious coverage across the country, including into this state. Matea ran the Post National Political Enterprise Investigations Team for 4 years, guiding the coverage of the special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Russia's interference into the 2016 campaign, the Ukraine pressure campaign, and the attempt to subvert the 2020 election results by then-President Donald Trump. Matea led the Post coverage team of January 6th attack on the US Capitol that won a George Polk Award and a Toner Prize for excellence in political reporting. The same coverage package won the 2022 Pulitzer Prize for Public Service. This year, her staff has won 2 Pulitzer Prizes, one for national reporting and another for feature writing. Liz Ramos is an award-winning history and government teacher at Alta Loma High School in Rancho Cucamonga, and a longtime News Literacy Project board member. She served on NLP's Strategic Planning Steering Committee, a practitioner of NLP's programs, and works with her peers in the field through teaching workshops. In 2019, Liz was named Outstanding Secondary Level Social Studies Teacher of the Year by California Council for Social Studies. Victoria Martinez-Luis is in the 12th grade at the Girls Academic Leadership Academy in LA. Victoria served as the senior editorial editor of her school paper last year and has completed several of NLP Checkology lessons. And lastly, Mr. Jim Newton of the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs is a veteran journalist, author, teacher. In 25 years at the Los Angeles Times, Jim worked as a reporter, editor, bureau chief, columnist, and janitor from 2007 and from 2007 to 2010, editor of the editorial pages. Jim was a member of 2 Pulitzer Prize winning teams at the Times for their coverage of the 1992 LA riots and the 1994 Northridge earthquake. Matea and Jim were, of course, colleagues at the LA Times. Jim, fortunate for us, came to UCLA full-time in early 2015 to teach in the Communication Studies Department and Public Policy, and to found The Blueprint, a new UCLA magazine addressing policy challenges facing California and Los Angeles in particular. He serves as the editor-in-chief of that magazine, and today will moderate the conversation. Without further ado, Jim, Matea, Liz, Victoria.
Thank you. Thank you. For being here. It's a pleasure to be with this panel and with all of you. Before we start though, I am going to say a special word about Matea. Matea and I have been, we were colleagues for some 20 odd years ago, as just mentioned, and through that whole time, those of you who work for the Bruin and are alumni of it have every reason to join me in taking pride in our relationship with Matea. She has been through that whole time a principled, dedicated, serious journalist, and also someone really dedicated to the well-being of her colleagues. So it is a special pleasure to be here with you. I'm sure you're nice people too. I've only just met. To get going, and I really do want to hear from the two of you about what this curriculum is and how to work with it. I do want to start though with you to see, Matea, if you talk for a moment just about what it is to discern the truth now. And I guess I'm thinking specifically in terms of whether it's Gaza or politics, images, reports. How do you at the Post know what is true today?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Jim, thank you for that very kind introduction. I think that there's no question this is a critical challenge facing the news media and by extension the public. It is more difficult than ever to really quickly be able to assess the veracity of the information washing over us. One of the things that obviously has sort of supercharged this challenge is the advent of artificial intelligence, and we already have started to see AI manipulated videos and texts that have been promoted and gone viral that in the middle of a major news story that force our reporters to try to figure out, this is something everybody is reacting to. It looks like a candidate. Is it really that person? So the challenge is really immense. How we deal with it, I think, is to really apply the principles that undergird our profession and that are more essential at this time than ever before, which is taking incredible care and thought with precision, making sure we really can verify the authenticity of something before we put it out there in the world to our readers and before we amplify it. I think one of the most difficult challenges is trying to figure out when to weigh in when something's fake and debunk it, because if we were to do that all the time, that would be a full-time, more than a full-time job. And so we have to really kind of pick our moments, I think. That's something that we talk a lot about. We have an incredible franchise at the Washington Post called The Fact Checker, which is authored by my colleague Glenn Kessler, who takes on basically deep investigative reporting to try to help people discern what is true and what is often being promoted by people in powerful positions. And we try to use that platform often, but I think one of the things that's so important, and I think what we want to talk about here today, is that it is more imperative than ever that engaged citizens have the tools to try to negotiate and navigate this world, because the news media cannot function as sort of the end-all and be-all of a gatekeeper to helping people understand that. All of you are exposed to this information and these rumors and manipulated content before we can even often jump into the conversation. So that's one of the reasons I'm so proud of the work of the News Literacy Project in helping cultivate a generation of critical thinkers who can try to do this.
Yeah. So one more before we turn to some of you. You mentioned debunking. To what degree do you see it as part of your responsibility, you and the Post, that is, to call out lies? I mean, whether it's a candidate or an institution or whatever, if someone is deliberately lying, is it your job to identify them as liars?
I think when it's having an impact on the public discourse and it's shaping how people are making decisions about their leadership, it is essential that we do that. We obviously had a lot of conversations during the Trump administration about when to do that. The Fact Checker franchise kept a long list of misstatements by the then president and tried to really tally them. We did decide at moments to use the word lie, which I think is has a specific connotation, and we use with care because I think it can sort of lose its power if you say that all the time. I mean, lie implies that someone has knowledge that they're manipulating or saying something untrue. It's very, very hard to get into someone's head. But in the cases in which we've seen that, a candidate or someone in power is promoting something that they clearly have been told by credible sources is not accurate, we think it's important to call that out.
Gotcha. Okay, so part of the goal of that, Beyond the Post, is through this news literacy project to try to educate people on this, right? And so Liz, if you'll talk a moment about, I guess, about the project and what it has meant to you in terms of presenting this and educating students. What is the material of the project supply that you didn't have before?
The News Literacy Project is a series of resources for teachers. One of the ones, the favorite one I love, is the Checkology program, which is a series of online lessons that teachers can utilize with their students, either with the kids on their, students on their devices, or the teacher can deliver and have the students engage in the content. And it goes through a variety of different topics, such as information zones, what are the different types of information, misinformation, what are the different types of misinformation. There's lessons that would easily apply in an English classroom, in a history classroom, which I'm using in mine, but also additionally, we have some more lessons that are geared for like math, with looking at algorithms, science, and factual based material in there. And so there's a lot of lovely resources that teachers can use to help lead their students through these lessons. In addition to a weekly newsletter that comes out to educators with information about like what's going on, with slides ready to go that teachers can use to talk about misinformation and fact checks, other ideas to be aware of. In addition, there's lots of different visuals that teachers can use to develop habits of mind. How do we fact check? What are the qualities of good journalism? So there's a whole host of resources and a lovely dashboard. And if teachers want to go beyond that, we also have where they can, a platform where they can inquire to set up a reporter coming in and talking to students in the classroom and discussing how journalism works, which I have been fortunate enough to bring in journalists to my classroom, and it's always a lovely and engaging conversation to have them have that opportunity.
So give us an example. Let's say you had a report, a source or a person quoted talking about a stolen election, say in 2020, just to pull an idea. How would you...
No, there have been those.
How would you, using this program, how would you guide a student toward discerning whether that's true or not? What would that mean?
Well, we could take a look at, okay, so where's the source of this information? How can we look to see who created it? And there's lovely lessons on how do we do a lateral search. So we could do a lateral search and then check on who's reporting that, what do we know about them. Also the idea of corroborating, what other news organizations are reporting that, and are those news organizations rounded in journalistic practices. And so there's a variety of different methods, and they have these lovely graphics that we can go through. I'm like, okay, well, hey, let's go and let's take a look at what we need to be checking, and we can go through that. So they have like a fact-checking list, and so we could use that, and that's one of the ones that we have with the rumor guard that is available for students, but it's also a rumor guard for the public. Mm-hmm. So we do also have resources that can help the general public as well, because being able to determine the credibility of information, it's something we want our students to know, but there's also so much in technology changing, so many things to be aware of, that we also need to help the general public, in addition to our students, be aware of this, because social media has changed, and a lot of us haven't been in school when the social media first came out, and so we all got to learn these practices to keep up with the ever-changing technology and the world and ecosystem that we're living in.
So, Victoria, will you talk a little bit about where do you and your fellow students get most of your information? It might be different for you and your fellow students, but if you can generalize, where do you think people your age that you know are getting most of their information? How reliable is it?
100% social media.
It's easier to answer than to ask.
Yeah. You know, admittedly, I want to say and realistically say that, like, oh, you know, I trust our other more fellow peers to investigate and be like, okay, is this actually fact checked? Like, but realistically, they're not in those cases, and it's like, okay, well, social media, and I know through like, especially major platforms like TikTok or like Instagram, even Twitter, like it's like constant information. It's like this constant echo chamber of misinformation, and it's scary, and it's definitely one of those things that, like, as our generation evolves, it definitely, like, I know one of you guys mentioned AI, which is another huge major like growing platform as well. But definitely like a bunch of kids, even myself, like guilty. I am guilty of that. Like definitely, as much as I try to focus on getting my news, and especially through like Checkology, what I've learned, like yes, like I obviously try to go to like news websites and whatnot, and like podcasts if I can. But definitely, I mean, social media is just one of the many
drives the whole
sources.
thing.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm going to interrupt myself here for one moment just to say we're going to talk for a few minutes up here and then open it up to all of you. So be thinking about the questions you'd like to ask here too, not just mine. All right. So let's say you're on social media today or tomorrow, and you see a provocative idea that's trafficking there that people are paying attention to. Tell us about the process that you would go through to determine whether it's true or not, and whether it's part of this program or not. How do you discern whether something is true or not?
Definitely. I think, well, I mean, if it's something like so bizarre that it's like it's a hurricane in Los Angeles, I'm like, well, that was a bad example, but if it's something like a tornado or something, like I'd get that. Like I'd be like, okay, that's not reasonable. But definitely, like I know you mentioned earlier, Liz, that you're like, do I look at other websites and I'm like, okay, are they reporting the same thing? Because if they're not, then how much can I trust this? And I know like in my classroom in journalism, we use this like, I don't know what the thing is, but like it's the different scales where it's like, does this news website skew more to the left, skew more to the right? Is it neutral and whatnot? And that's been such a great help. And I'm like, especially I'm taking AP research right now. And so it's a lot of like looking at, it's a lot looking at like sources and whatnot, and especially like one of our primary sources, like getting, at least the project that I'm doing is like student voices, and it's definitely looking at like, oh, are these students' voices being performed in a platform where they skew more to the left or skew more to the right? Like how do their opinions go onto it? And the same thing applies for like if I see some like outrageous news or something, I'm like, I don't think that's real or something. Definitely just fact checking, and even like asking a friend, but even though like, listen to both ways.
I'm a little nervous at the phrase skews to the left, skews to the right. What would the Washington Post, would it show as skewing to the left or skewing to the right? I know you don't have your device in front of you, but I'm just curious, who's making that determination? What's that based on?
Gotcha. Well, okay. Maybe skews isn't the right word.
No.
Okay, no.
I don't mean to hold you to the word. I'm just curious what that means.
No, please hold me accountable. Definitely. No, definitely. It's like, I even like when we first brought up the platform, I don't know what the platform's called.
Adfont Media is the organization. They create something called a media bias chart, and the words that they use are skew right, skew left.
Oh.
Yes, yeah. Right. And so it's kind of just like, even like when we first heard of it, it's like, okay, how do we know that this platform's even like predicting the right? Is it skewing to the left?
Yeah.
Is it skewing to the right? Because you question that, right? Because you can't really obviously believe in something that's so profound and I guess like so questionable. But I think in terms of that, I think it was just, yeah.
Well, it sort of raises a question that I wanted to ask you anyway, so maybe I'll ask all three of you now. What do you think about the notion of objectivity? Is that an attainable goal for journalism? Obviously, it's important for the Washington Post. Maybe start with you, Matea.
Yeah, it's quite a loaded term in our industry today, and there's been impassioned editorials written by many former Washington Post editors on this topic recently. So I will be careful how much I try to wade into that debate. I mean, I will just tell you, I prefer the term neutrality and fairness, and I just think it's really important that our inquiry be fair-minded, right? Our reporting has to be grounded in an effort to try to ascertain the fullest truth we can. And that can take lots of different forms, but coming at any sort of question, any sort of line of coverage from a neutral and fair point of view is at the heart, I think, of what separates journalism from, you know, people who are promoting advocacy work. And it's very important that we distinguish that. It's I think one of the most challenging things for mainstream, as quote unquote mainstream major news organizations, is that so many, because of our polarized environment, there's so many efforts to sort of box in our coverage as part of that political spectrum. So it's incredibly important for us that we are seen as independent and neutral. Not everyone is going to agree with every story and perspective, but it's very important that the breadth of coverage expresses that neutrality.
And do you think the public gives you the credit for that? I mean, generally speaking.
I mean, I think it's harder than ever before. I think it, doesn't help when people are sort of attacking the coverage, both from the left and the right, and trying to characterize it one way. I will say that my inbox right now is absolutely filled with people, both who say we are being unfair to Israel and unfair to the Palestinians. I have an equal number of emails expressing real anger and outrage. And part of it is I feel like in this fractured media environment, people often see one story and make a decision about our entire scope of coverage based on that. It's very hard to ask people, can you please sit down and read the last 40 stories we wrote on this topic, because you will see that we're actually approaching this from lots of points of view, and the reality of how people consume information is just not that. But I think it's harder and harder to get the benefit of the doubt from the public, and that I think is what has fundamentally changed in the time you and I have entered journalism. And I think 25 years ago it was much more baked in that people gave the benefit of the doubt to journalists.
I remember years ago at the times we were both there, I saw a chart at one point. It was the list of reasons why people canceled their subscriptions. And the first was just moving or a change of something. Second was the paper's too liberal, and third was the paper's too conservative.
Right.
So, what are you going to do? Liz, your thoughts, neutrality, whether you call it neutrality or objectivity, is there room for that kind of reporting? Do you have faith that the media is delivering that kind of reporting that is available to you?
Well, one of the things I tell my students is we want to go to news sources grounded in journalistic practices, but then I also tell them we want to read news from different organizations. Yeah. And I say we want to avoid getting an echo chamber and confirmation bias. So we're always talking about that. And one of the things in my government classes, we set up flipboards and we have all the different topics that we'll be talking about. And the students will be flipping in news articles. And I say, I want to see news articles from different news mediums so that we can see that. And then also, I've done a lesson for PBS called Mediocrity. And one of the things that the lesson does is there's a video that they watch, and then I have the kids go to 3 different journalistic publications and read a story on a topic from the 3 different news organizations. What's similar, what's different? And we talk all the time. Like, my students are tired of me saying this already, and we're gonna keep on saying it to the end of the year. We gotta read carefully. What are the word choices that organizations are using? There's hidden meaning behind what kind of words you're using on different topics. Are you talking about illegal immigrant or somebody who's undocumented? Are you talking about pro-choice or pro-life? All these different words that kind of give us a little bit of a reading on things. So I'm always telling them to read carefully and then read from multiple points of view to try to see what are some of these pieces that maybe one story includes one part and another one, but then also we want to be robust and avoid just falling into echo chamber. And so I subscribe to your paper and a number of other ones. So I have a lot of debits that come out of my Apple Pay for a bunch of different news organizations that we read in my class and that. Because we want to do that. And that's just something I grew up with. My dad was avid about news and current events. And even when he was in hospice, he was telling my sisters, I want news. He didn't want just the news, the local news. He's all, I want different newspapers. My dad kept up that process even till his last days. And that's just something that's been ingrained in me. Sorry, didn't know what to do.
I love that.
Victoria, do you find neutral coverage that satisfies you as being neutral when you're doing the work that you're doing?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Well, I'm wondering, you talked a little bit, we kicked this off, or I kicked this off, responding to your phrasing of skews left or skews right. And I'm just wondering if you find things that feel genuinely neutral to you, coverage that feels genuinely neutral.
No, of course. I think, okay, well, in addition to what I was saying, in terms of the ad font media, there are obviously sections where it's neutral. And usually those are the websites that we solely focus on. Like in my AP government class right now, we're doing current events every week. We do it every week because, obviously stay on top of US government and whatnot. And in those recommendations, he's like, okay, you guys, obviously he has his own platforms he likes to use, but we usually try to focus on more obviously neutral platforms, AP News, PBS type of thing, which are great resources I find to be really helpful. And I know like in a bunch of like, especially when I'm doing my research now, like a bunch of peer review sources are really helpful, because obviously although they're doing it in a thesis, it's not going to be so much into their bias that I tend to focus on.
Mm-hmm. I noticed that in some of the language that the News Literacy Project uses in describing its work, there's a warning against, as it says, content that's created to persuade, sell, mislead, or exploit. And I was curious, any of you, I get the concern about misleading or exploiting. Persuading or selling strike me as a little squishier as categories. I mean, a lot of editorial writing, for instance, is meant to persuade. Mm-hmm. Is content that is meant to persuade suspect in your view?
Well, I will say, as a journalist who's gone into the classroom and talked about some of these, sort of that frame to help people assess, I think the goal is just to help arm students with the ability to identify language it's trying to persuade. Not that they shouldn't read that, right? Like, obviously powerful editorial and opinion writing is part of what should be part of the public discourse. But I think it's incredibly important for students to recognize, as Liz was saying, what are the word choices? I would do an exercise when I'd go into the class where I would have everyone highlight the adjectives and read them out loud. And, it really is remarkable. And, I think one of the things I've found that students really connect with is people, they do not like to feel manipulated, right? And so, like, I'm sure this is a conversation, Victoria, you and your classmates have, is like, if someone's really trying to force you to think a certain way, it comes across when you really carefully analyze the text. And I think that is one thing this generation is very attuned to. So sort of arming with that idea of like, let's look at language choice and what is the writer of this trying to get you to feel? And maybe that's a perfectly legitimate, like, exercise for that writer to do, but you should just know what the impulse is, right?
And I think also with infotainment, like I know in AP GovLand, we talked about infotainment and helping students who will then go out and become adults and talking with other people. And I know my students come back that they've had these conversations with other peers in their college lives. Understanding on infotainment that it's an entertainment show, but they're also giving you the news, and you got to be careful where lines get blurred, and helping them to understand that, going back to looking at when somebody's starting off talking about their opinion and word choices, and then we're getting into the news. And so a lot is to be, like when they're watching the news, the infotainment shows, that is something we got to teach our students how to be critical of, especially as more and more of them following them on the TikToks and whatever else is coming out that I cannot keep track of with them. It seems like there's something new every school year coming out, but helping them to understand that and be aware of that and make important decisions on what they're getting, and fact checking and understanding what's real and what's opinion pieces on those.
Do you think, Victoria, that how would you characterize the amount of material that you see on social media that is attempting to manipulate you in some, not you personally, but readers?
That's a heavy question. Well, I feel like there's a variety of subjects to look at. I feel like the ones that I mostly look at, because I mostly follow, I try to stay on top with like government and politics and whatnot. And even my own bias goes into it, of course. But because there's such huge amount of political polarization in the United States, especially when it comes to these two big parties of like left and right, it definitely becomes tricky and challenging, because algorithms also follow you into those sources. Like they look at, because I follow like LA Times, do I look at that, right? Like housing and whatnot. Even those follow me. Like I was in Google once and I was like looking at stuff, I'm like, when did this come up? Like there's just sources that automatically just pop up, and news sites that would just automatically recommend, because that's how the algorithm works itself. And so you get a lot of stuff, but definitely like I love that you mentioned the exercise with like you did with your students, where it's like looking at both sides. In like my seminar class, we were looking at, like, my project and we were looking at QAnon, which is very, very a big topic, and it's like very challenging to differentiate, because obviously you want to look at sources that you personally look at, but you want to look at neutrality and at sources in the middle. Yes.
So let me ask you all one more, and then I'll open it up to all of you. Is there a role, if we assume that disinformation and misinformation are significant problems for the society, is there a role for the government to play in controlling that? As some of you, maybe all of you know, the court has taken up a couple cases. One rising out of Texas, in which there's Texas law that allows the government to intervene to force social media sites to carry material that's more conservative. The theory there being that they were somehow censoring conservative speech. On the other side, and it's more recent, the court has raised the question of whether it's a violation of the First Amendment for the federal government to urge sites to take down material that is misinformation with respect to COVID, which raised the question now from both sides about whether the government has a constitutional or appropriate role to play in any of this. And I'd be curious whether any of you think the government should have a role in this.
Yeah, well, you won't be surprised, Jim, to hear that I feel that government regulation of speech is a really scary idea. And I think that, you know, it is hard to imagine a scenario in which that does not, you know, create sort of a camel's nose under the tent and setting precedent. I actually can't imagine a lot of that actually passing constitutional muster. I mean, I don't think the answer is to have the government try to control, like, what is the right information. I think the answer is creating an informed and literate citizenry that knows how to choose information that is credible and can make up their own mind. And it's really at the heart. I mean, I fervently believe that one of the biggest divides in our country right now is the divide of what information we are consuming. That is actually at the heart of our democratic crisis, that people are not sharing the same set of facts. And so unless people feel themselves empowered to seek out that information, I don't think any government action would serve to ameliorate that.
And we could go on all day about this, and so I won't. But I couldn't agree with you more. Although I found myself questioning on this just this week. If someone is knowingly posting information on COVID, say, that is causing people not to get vaccinated or otherwise putting them in harm's way, it does seem like there's a public health argument for government intervention that might be separate from speech, and I'm not sure how to parse that exactly, but it did seem to me to raise the possibility that there may be space for government action here.
Yeah, and we actually just did this phenomenal investigation of doctors that promoted COVID misinformation and how little accountability and action there was from government regulators, which are the state medical boards. So I do think there are spaces in which there are government agencies or oversight that are appropriate when it comes to actual public health or things that could actually contribute to death. But that is sort of a separate question than speech. But I do, that was something that I think really illuminated that the state medical boards weren't equipped to actually try to deal with medical professionals that were promoting, COVID, faux, prescriptions that actually were causing people to die.
Liz, Victoria, your thoughts on whether you would welcome government action in this area to thwart the spread of disinformation?
Personally, I'm with Matea, and it worries me because what if the government is hypothetically propagating misinformation and directing their bureaucratic officials to go along with that? That would leave us in a problematic space depending on who is in charge. So teaching people how to have the skills, that way you can survive despite who might be in power and who may or may not have that power is, I think, important. And it's not just important for us in government class and for the press, but these are lifelong skills. They're like really college and career skills and lifelong skills as an engaged citizen making informed decisions, not just at the ballot box, but in our everyday life that we want our students to have. And I reiterate that point all the time with my students. News literacy, it's a life skill. It's not just for this government class. It's gonna be something you're gonna need in your job, in your careers, when you're in college. And so if we teach this and we help the broader public at large to have this idea of steering the ship in the appropriate direction, hypothetically.
Victoria.
Well, I've been in my journalism class, we've been in a position where there were topics that were like, whether or not we could talk about it, just because, we attend an all-girls school, and so there's topics that are like, I don't know, but we've learned that the News Literacy Project, especially like Czechology, we talked about it, like one of the first lessons that you get on Czechology is like whether or not journalism, like journalistic values and whatnot go into like the First Amendment and whatnot, like freedom of speech, but there's also more activities in where like there's this really great interactive map that I remember where it's like journalists from like Mexico, or like you compare it to like journalists from like Ukraine, and you see what type of regulations they have on there, which is always such a great and informative tool that we use. But when it comes to like regulations, I agree, it's a very scary thing. Like one of the main reasons why I wanted to go into editorial editing is because I love writing editorials, like I love voicing my opinions, I love saying this and that, but it's scary if someone says like, no, you can't do this. The word no and scary is scary in general, but when it comes to journalists, especially people, because human nature is complicated. People want to talk what they want to talk, right? But I don't know. I don't know much about the topic itself, so I'd want to say no for now.
Sounds to me like you do.
Yeah.
I would want to say no for now. Things can change.
Very good. All right, so let me turn it over to any of you. I see someone in the back there. Yes.
I'm wondering what the market is for this, or what the market should be. I've worked as a journalist and a college teacher, and it's my experience that people believe what they want to believe, and you're not going to tell them any different. And I also think that for us here, this is all fine and well, but we don't need a discussion on news literacy. There are other people who need a discussion on news literacy. You know who they are, even if you think you know. And so what can you do to bring news literacy to those people and to disabuse them of their incorrect beliefs?
So I'll tell you just a quick snapshot of the News Literacy Project, which I probably should have said at the beginning. It's a nonprofit that was started by our former LA Times colleague Alan Miller back in 2008, after he went and visited his daughter's 8th grade classroom and realized that a lot of them did not know how to critically understand the media. It's now expanded across the country, and so I completely agree with you. We have to reach students and young people, and that's why this is really a program aimed at middle school and high school, which Liz can speak to a lot more about the specifics of. But I do think that finding young people who are really at a point when they're starting to gain those critical thinking skills and applying them to how they understand the media landscape is really, really important. And I do find that it clicks. I'm sure Victoria can speak to this. Like, it is amazing how quickly these concepts make sense and give students a framework to navigate their world. I'll give a very quick example. When we started the program, it was all in-person classroom visits, and now is this digital program. But I went to a classroom in Brooklyn, and I had all the students at the beginning of the classroom raise their hand if they had ever spread a rumor. As you can imagine, every single student raised their hand. And then I talked about the power of rumors to affect, like cause pain and distress. And we talked about how important it is to have a primary and a secondary source before you share information, and how journalists make sure we don't publish anything until we actually have confidence in that information. And at the end of the class, I asked them how many of them were going to spread rumors, and none of them raised their hand. So I think I might have started with one classroom, but I do think that's the power of the program, and we absolutely have to reach students. I mean, the goal is really to have make this curriculum available to every single school district in the country, and that I think would really be a gift.
Yeah, and the curriculum is free. Teachers just got to sign up and they have access to it with their students. And I was talking beforehand, before we got on the panel that we started, California, our governor just signed a bill, Assembly Bill 8.
You told me, then
I wrote it down. I knew I'd forget.
873.
873 this recently, and that's going to call for news literacy to be taught in K-12. and specifically to be taught in math, science, history, and English language arts classes, which there are Czechology lessons ready to go to help them in every single one of those classes. So California, as well as a handful of other states, have seen the value and the necessity of this and are starting to include it in their frameworks and required curriculum. We just need to expand that across the board and hopefully see that happening more and more as we go.
Great.
My question actually was about the fact that I think New Jersey is the first one to require it for K-12, and I wanted to know if there's anything in the works for California, so thank you.
Yes, and it's actually part of the habits of mind for the California Civic Seal of Engagement, and I was happy to be on the teacher panel advising for the California CDE on that. And I know I helped write our county toolkit, and I said we need to put that in there, and I've talked to my district about that, and they know, like, we know you're very passionate. I'm all, yes, I'm very passionate, we need this. So there is also a room for it for the students to show how they've developed these habits of mind and dispositions within that, and it's been marked as one of the 6 most effective proven practices for teaching civics. It's in the top 6, so understanding current events and news and making articulate, fact-based arguments.
I think you should go, sir.
Just like to give a shout out to another free resource. The News Literacy Project is phenomenal, and it has great application throughout the country. But Read It Across the Aisle, something you can get on your phone for free, gives you 21 major news sources across the spectrum. You could quibble with whether it leans very right or very left, but it encourages people to read out of their comfort zone and gives us ways of looking at those. And in fact, many of them have paywalls, but if you read Across the Aisle, you can read a few articles without the paywall.
I think you're under an obligation to identify yourself, though, too.
I happen to be the father of Matea.
We appreciate it on all counts. Yes, Bud.
Hi, yes. My question is, with this project, the News Literacy Project, is there opposition to this, or are you sensing in any way that perhaps some parents or maybe public officials in school districts or local government who might be uneasy, or perhaps they don't like this idea that much? And in that sense, like, what kind of opposition if you have encountered any, what are they like, and also how do you try to resolve that?
Great.
Good question.
So sometimes people may hear the word news literacy. There may be some people who might think it leans a certain way or comes from a certain point of view, but the News Literacy Project lessons, they're nonpartisan. They'll include examples from media, which many would say lean left or lean right as an exemplar on the different news types, an example. But it is nonpartisan, it's straight down the line, it's showing how to develop habits of mind. So like there is one of the lessons, I believe it's the Czechology, where it's like talking about points of view and persuasion and that. And there's a little bit of a clip from Rachel Maddow, and then there's another part of a clip, oh my gosh, I always forget his name. Somebody on the right. and the kid's like, okay, we've seen both of those people. So they'll have an example of people from 2 different sides. But it is not partisan. It's down the middle. We're showing you how to be objective, how to look up information. So if people just give it a chance and look at it, they can see like there's no hidden agenda trying to sway people to think one way or another. It's just how do we credibly source information and become informed citizens and make sure we're reading information based on fact.
Do you have, not just interrupt, you mentioned this AB 873.
Mm-hmm.
Were there no votes? Were the members of the Assembly voted against it?
Oh, I do not know that.
Oh, anyway, that might be a place to look for possible opponents. But yeah.
I have a question for Matea. How do you handle, as management of a major newspaper, both internal and external feedback when it comes to neutrality and fairness?
It's a great question. I mean, very much try to engage with it. You know, as I mentioned, my inbox, which is very full lately. I mean, I have a rule that I try to answer every single reader email that is sent to me in good faith. There's a lot of people who like just want to sort of shout and scream, so I don't feel the need to necessarily engage with those people. But you know, if someone has a question or a specific critique, I very much try to answer them in a substantive manner. I feel like it's incredibly important that we provide that sense of outreach and accessibility. We also have standards editors at the Washington Post, that 2 new positions we created in the last few years, who are just 2 phenomenal journalists who work very quickly to help sort of communicate our policies and standards when readers have questions.
Please.
Hi, I'm curious about, given all of the events happening over the past few weeks, where international coverage? Are you encouraging your students to read international news sources, reputable ones, or I guess it could be, you know, trying to cover both sides, but how to evaluate that?
Yes, that has been a lot of discussion in my classes, and then also I'm the advisor for our Arab club at my school, and we just had our Wednesday club meeting, and they watched Dubai Bling, and then we had a conversation on what's been going on. And one of the students that I haven't had yet had mentioned a story, and I was like, well, let's talk about that. Where did you see that? And so we had that discussion about that it was misinformation that she was talking about. And so we had that discussion, well, here's how it's been disproved about who was responsible for the hospital bombing. And so we had that conversation and how to go about that. So I know in my classes, we've been having that conversation and discussing that, the situations about what's going on in the world and how we want to make sure we're being careful. And like my students also know that when this was first happening, they're like, okay, how do we find this information? We're like, well, we got to be careful, because when things are happening fast, and we've discussed this before, it's hard to know what's real and not real in the fog of war. And so we've discussed that, and we want to hold back and let's get some time so we can give the news authorities time to properly vet information on that. So we've also had that discussion in our classes, that you got to be careful of what's first being put out there, and give some time, because yeah. So we've had that discussion as well.
We have time for 1 or 2 more, yes?
Hey, we talked a lot about like AI and tech is like helping perpetuate, you know, misinformation, but it seems pretty inevitable that they have to be part of the solution strategy, like the internet was, you know, as well. Mm-hmm. So curious, both on the education side as well, specifically on the newspaper side, like strategically, how are you guys thinking about specifically AI and how to use that to help promote news literacy?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we very much are engaged. We have, I think, 3 AI committees at the Post right now looking at different aspects of it. So there's the piece of it in which we, you know, want to make sure, one, that our content isn't just being scraped up and used in these models without, you know, our permission. But there's also incredible promise for journalists in using this technology to surface quickly information and help us actually, you know, drill down with large bodies of work that would take reporters a long time to do. So we have a lot of experiments going on right now in the newsroom, mostly on the reporting side of like, how can we use AI in the reporting process? I think the principle we're really trying to work under is that it should be something that's sort of an extension and gives journalists a chance to sort of turbocharge their work, that it's not going to be used in the process of actually writing and editing, and that we really want to make sure there's a bright line and a lot of guidelines around it.
And then from the teacher side, there's opportunities to carefully use AI in the classroom, like maybe have students tell me something about X, and then have the students go and source information, factual information, to corroborate that. Some students, sometimes I know my econ counterpart, she had the kids look up some of those econ concepts that are kind of vague and have it describe it for them or explain it in a simplified manner. And that worked well. But we also talk a lot about how you don't take that information and propagate it as your own. Because I have one of my lovely kiddos that did something and well, we never said this in class, that's not true. But they don't understand that the AI, it's not necessarily going to give you everything that's factual. And so that's a teaching moment to teach them how to do it. Just like not everything on Google is real. And so that's why Friday we're in the library using academic research database and nobody's allowed to go on Google. So our librarian it's her show, and we're doing academic research. No, just you got to read the article to find the answer. So there's teachable moments.
Sir.
The many of us in this room who root for newspapers would love to hear that newspapers rate highly in data on trustworthiness or left versus right versus neutral skew. Do they?
I like newspapers.
But do you have the data based on those, that kind of information to say if newspapers as a group, as a platform, as a kind of journalism are better?
I believe Pointer, if I'm not mistaken, has some on that, because I know I'll go to Pointer to get information and data on resources. So I believe Pointer and I think it's Media Lab also have information on that. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so Media Lab and Pointer have information on that.
One more.
Yes, thank you so much. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to Victoria. She's my student, and she agreed to come here just yesterday. And she's in the throes of like 75 AP classes and college applications. So just thank you so much for Victoria to come. And I wanted to ask a question to you, Liz, about I know because I use Checkology in my classroom, and it is a really wonderful resource. I'm wondering, I haven't seen any lessons on AI, and if there's any lessons coming up on how to filter out AI content and how that plays into news literacy.
There are currently some new lessons in development and in progress. Our team is very, very dedicated to make sure they're doing research and everything's double and triple checked. But there are some new materials that'll be coming down the pike. So keep posted.
They'll be produced by AI.
No. We got a lovely research team. Yeah.
Well, on behalf of the UCLA Alumni Association and the Daily Bruin Alumni Network, I want to thank Jim, Matea, Liz, and Victoria. Round of applause for applause. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for coming tonight. For the Daily Bruin alumni, our cocktail reception will start officially at 5:30, but I hear the bar is open now.